Imagine you and 26 roommates decide to get a joint credit card because one of you lost their job, but instead of buying groceries, you realize no one actually knows who is supposed to pay the bill when it comes due. But here's what happened. The roommates maxed out the card, the bank is actually just a printer in the basement, and the bill is now nearly €1 trillion. Today we're going to dissect the next generation EU fund, a financial Frankenstein that turned a temporary relief measure into a permanent debt trap that most people don't even know exists. It all started with a panic in 2020, where the solution to a global lockdown was, naturally, to print an ungodly amount of money. Between 2020 and May 2024, the European Commission's net issuance reached almost €500 billion, a number that sounds fake until you realize it's our actual reality. This wasn't just a small loan. This issuance volume completely surpassed issuances by almost every other entity in the region. The goal was to fund the next generation EU, or NGEU, which sounds like a sci-fi sequel but is actually just massive leverage. By August 2024, the Commission had already issued around €325 billion to finance RRF payments alone. That is roughly half of the total allocation, meaning we burned through the first half of the tank in record time. The narrative was that this was a one-off, emergency measure. But looking at that €500 billion net figure, does this look like a one-off to you? It looks a lot more like a lifestyle change. We essentially decided that debt wasn't a bug, but a feature of the new European economy. And the scary part? We are just getting warmed up. The sheer velocity of this borrowing spree suggests that the emergency brake has been permanently removed. To make this pill easier to swallow, bureaucrats came up with something called the CANA, Unified Funding Approach. As of today, the EU has issued exactly €456.92 billion in EU bonds under this shiny new label. It's a brilliant rebranding exercise designed to make debt look like revenue. They are currently running at an issuance pace of approximately €150 billion per year. That is, the GDP of a small country being borrowed into existence every single year until at least 2026. This approach allows them to pool the risk, so if one country fails, everyone feels the pain, which is, theoretically, safer. With €456.92 billion already out the door, the bond markets are now flooded with this supranational paper. The scale is so massive, it distorts the market for actual national sovereign bonds. We are looking at high issuance volumes, sustained through 2024, 2025, and 2026. It's like using a second mortgage to pay off your first mortgage, but calling it Unified Housing Finance. It's elegant, it's sophisticated, and it's arguably a ticking time bomb. So where did nearly €500 billion go? Of the proceeds raised so far, almost €297 billion has been dispersed directly to member states under the Recovery and Resilience Facility. That is a lot of walking around money for politicians who usually have to fight for every cent. But wait, there's more. A further €70 billion has been allocated to other EU programs benefiting from the funding. That is, €70 billion, essentially vanishing into the bureaucratic ether of Brussels projects. It's the equivalent of buying a boat and not knowing where you docked it. We are seeing a dispersal mechanism that is both massive and somewhat opaque. When you hand out €297 billion with relatively loose strings, strange things happen to fiscal discipline. This liquidity injection was supposed to modernize economies, but money is fungible. Are we building bridges? Or are we just plugging budget holes that were already leaking? The line between investment and waste gets very blurry at this altitude. When you turn on a fire hose of cash, you don't just water the garden, you drown the neighbors. Here is the dark comedy of it all. They can't even spend the money fast enough. As of the end of January 2024, only 37% of the total NGEU allocated grants and loans had actually been dispersed. That means the majority of this emergency money is still stuck in the pipe years after the emergency started. The breakdown is even more embarrassing, with 42% of grants paid out, but only 31% of loans dispersed. Why are the loans lagging? Because borrowing money from the EU comes with homework, and member states hate homework. The absorption capacity of these governments is surprisingly low. We authorized an €800 billion bubble, but we're only running at 37% capacity, because bureaucracy is the only force in the universe stronger than greed. It raises the question: if you didn't need the money urgently enough to take it, Did you need to borrow it in the first place? This lag creates a weird economic limbo, where the debt is real, but the growth is theoretical. We are paying interest on promises. It's like ordering a feast for a starving man, and then making him fill out triplicate forms before he can eat a breadstick. Not all roommates are created equal in this house. The disbursement rates vary wildly, ranging from 0% for some countries to almost 60% for France. That's right. France has managed to grab nearly 60% of its allocation, proving they are the world champions of administrative paperwork. Meanwhile, Italy and Spain, the countries that were supposedly the main reason for this fund, are lagging behind. Italy has received around 50% of its allocation, which is decent, but Spain is sitting at a miserable 30%. This disparity creates a massive political headache in Ingham. You have France feasting, while Spain is still reading the menu. If the recovery fund works for Paris but stalls in Madrid, the economic divergence in the Eurozone actually gets worse, not better. The whole point was convergence. But the data shows we are funding a multi-speed recovery. High issuance impacts in 2024 to 2026 vary by country, with Italy showing a 1.9% impact compared to lower figures elsewhere. It turns out, throwing money at structural problems doesn't fix the structure. It just highlights who has the better accountants. Then, the plot twisted. The fund designed for a virus morphed into a war chest. Over 13.11 billion euros has now been dispersed to Ukraine under the Ukraine facility. This is part of a larger plan to finance up to 33 billion euros in loans to Ukraine between 2024 and 2027. Now, supporting Ukraine is a geopolitical necessity, but financing it through a COVID recovery vehicle is financial acrobatics. We are leveraging the EU's credit rating to fund a war effort on the Eastern Front. That 33 billion euros loan package effectively ties the EU's bond market to the outcome of a kinetic war. The risk profile of these bonds has fundamentally changed. Investors bought paper to fix Italian roads, and now they are holding paper that funds the defense of Kyiv. It's a classic bait-and-switch of liability. The 13.11 billion euros already sent is just the down payment. If the geopolitical situation deteriorates, does the 33 billion euros cap hold, or do we print more? The credit card isn't just for groceries anymore. We're buying ammo. Here is where it gets scary. In 2023, government bond yield spreads declined significantly, lulling everyone into a false sense of security. But interest rates are no longer zero. The 325 billion euros issued to finance RRF payments needs to be serviced and eventually rolled over. We are issuing 150 billion euros a year into a market that demands real returns. The cost of this debt is exploding compared to the zero-interest era of 2020. The EU doesn't have its own tax revenue to pay this back, so they are relying on own resources, which is code for we will tax you later. The high issuance in 2024 to 2026 coincides with a period where national deficits are also high. You have Italy, Spain, and France all competing for capital. At the same time, the EU itself is soaking up 150 billion euros a year. It is a crowding out effect that you can't see until liquidity dries up. The 2023 spread decline was the calm before the storm. We are building a refinancing wall so high that when we hit it, we won't just crash, we'll splatter. We are barreling toward 2026, the theoretical end date for these issuances. The plan is to stop at an approximate 800 billion euros total. But let's be real. When has a government program ever stopped? With 456.92 billion euros already issued and 150 billion euros coming every year, we will hit that cap fast. The temporary nature of this debt is the biggest lie in modern finance. If they stop issuing in 2026, the withdrawal of liquidity could trigger a recession. If they don't stop, they break their own laws. They have dispersed 297 billion euros to states who are now addicted to the cash flow. Cutting them off is political suicide. So, we are likely looking at the permanent federalization of European debt. The bubble isn't going to pop, it's going to fossilize. We are creating a zombie debt structure that will eat tax revenues for the next 40 years. And remember, 30% to 50% of the funds haven't even been absorbed yet. We are addicted to a drug we haven't even finished injecting. We took a 500 billion euros panic reaction, rebranded it as unified funding, and used it to spray cash unevenly across the continent while quietly pivoting to fund a war. The 800 billion euros bubble isn't invisible because it's small. It's invisible because we are living inside of it. If you want to survive the pop, smash that subscribe button. It's free, unlike this debt.